Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
North Richmond Street was a calm place, especially when school ended. There was a two-story house at the end of the street, all by itself. The other houses on the street were quiet too, and they seemed to look at each other with serious faces. A priest used to live in our house, but he passed away. The air inside the house was old and stuffy. I found some old books in one of the rooms. The garden behind the house had an apple tree and some bushes. I even found the priest's old bike pump there. He was kind and left all his money to charities and his furniture to his sister. In winter, the days were short and it got dark before we finished dinner. When we played outside, it was cold and the sky turned violet. We ran through dark lanes behind the houses, sometimes meeting rough people. When we came back to the street, the kitchen lights were on. If my uncle came home, we'd hide until he went inside. Sometimes Mangan's sister would come out to call him in for tea. We watched her from a distance. Every morning I watched her door from the front room. When she came out, I followed her secretly. I never talked to her, but I liked her a lot. Even in places where love stories don't usually happen, I couldn't stop thinking about her. On Saturday evenings, I had to go with my aunt to carry parcels. We walked through busy streets surrounded by loud noises and crowds. But her name was always on my mind, even in moments I didn't understand. Sometimes I felt like crying for no reason, and I couldn't stop my heart from feeling so much. I didn't think much about the future or if I'd ever get to talk to her. One evening, I went into the room where the priest died. It was dark and rainy, and the house was quiet. I heard the rain outside and felt grateful that I couldn't see much. I felt like I was losing my senses, and I couldn't help but whisper, "Oh, love. Oh, love," over and over again. Finally, she spoke to me. I was so surprised that I didn't know how to respond. She asked me if I was going to Araby. I couldn't remember if I said yes or no. She said it would be a wonderful bazaar, and she wished she could go. "Why can't you?" I asked her. While she talked, she played with a shiny bracelet on her wrist. She couldn't go to the bazaar because she had to attend a retreat at her convent that week. Her brother and some other boys were busy fighting, leaving me alone at the railings. She held on to one of the spikes and bowed her head toward me. The light from the lamp across our door highlighted her neck and hair, and her hand resting on the railing. It also lit up the edge of her dress and petticoat. "It's good for you," she said. "If I go," I replied, "I'll bring you something." After the evening, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I wanted the days to pass quickly so I could go to the bazaar. School became boring and her image filled my mind during class. I asked for permission to go to the bazaar on Saturday night. My aunt was surprised and hoped it wasn't anything strange. I didn't pay much attention in class, and my teacher's face went from friendly to serious, worried that I was becoming lazy. I couldn't focus on anything but her. On Saturday morning, I reminded my uncle about the bazaar. He was busy looking for his hat brush and replied shortly, "Yes, I know." Since he was in the hallway, I couldn't lie by the window in the front room. I left the house feeling upset and walked slowly to school. The air was cold and made me feel uneasy. When I came home for dinner, my uncle still hadn't returned. It was still early, so I sat staring at the clock. Eventually, I grew irritated by the ticking and went upstairs. The empty rooms made me feel free, and I wandered from room to room singing. From the front window, I watched my friends playing in the street below. Their voices sounded faint, and I leaned against the cool glass, looking at the dark house where she lived. I might have stood there for an hour, imagining her brown-clad figure in the lamplight. When I came back downstairs, Mrs. Mercer was sitting by the fire. She was an old lady who liked to talk a lot. She collected used stamps for a good cause. I had to listen to her gossip while we had tea. Dinner took longer than usual and my uncle still hadn't come home. Mrs. Mercer had to leave because it was getting late and she didn't like being out at night due to the cold air. After she left, I started pacing the room, feeling frustrated. My aunt said, "You might have to wait until another night for your bazaar trip." At 9 o'clock, I heard my uncle come in. I heard him talking to himself and the hall stand rocking when he hung up his coat. I knew what that meant. When he was halfway through dinner, I asked him for money to go to the bazaar. He had forgotten. "People are asleep now," he said. I didn't smile. My aunt told him firmly, "Can't you give him the money? You've kept him waiting long enough." My uncle apologized and said he believed in the saying, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." He asked where I was going, and when I told him again, he asked if I knew a poem called The Arab's Farewell to His Steed. As I left the kitchen, he was about to recite it to my aunt. I tightly held onto a coin as I walked down Buckingham Street towards the station. Seeing the busy streets reminded me of why I was going. I sat in a third-class train carriage, and after waiting for a long time, the train finally started moving slowly. It passed by old houses and the river. At Westland Row Station, a crowd tried to get on the train, but the porters told them it was a special train for the bazaar. I was alone in the carriage. In a few minutes, the train stopped at an improvised platform. Looking at the clock, I saw it was almost 10 o'clock. In front of me stood a large building with the magical name displayed. I couldn't find a cheap entrance, and I worried the bazaar might close soon. So, I quickly passed through a turnstile and gave a tired-looking man a coin. I found myself in a big hall with a gallery halfway up. Most of the stalls were closed, and it was mostly dark, like after a church service. I walked timidly into the center of the bazaar. A few people were still at open stalls. 2 men were counting money in front of a curtain with Café Chanton written on it in colorful lights. I listened to the coins clinking. Trying to remember why I came, I went to one of the stalls and looked at porcelain vases and tea sets with flowers on them. A young lady at the stall was chatting and laughing with 2 young men. They had English accents, and I vaguely listened to their conversation. "Oh, I never said that." "Oh, but you did." "Oh, but I didn't." "Did she say that?" "Yes, I heard her." "Oh, that's not true." The young lady noticed me and asked if I wanted to buy anything. She didn't sound very interested. It seemed like she was talking to me because she had to. I looked at the big jars by the entrance and quietly said, "No, thank you." The young lady moved a vase and went back to the 2 men. They kept talking about the same thing. Sometimes the young lady glanced at me. I stayed at her stall for a bit, even though I knew it was pointless. I wanted to pretend I was really interested in her things. Then I walked slowly down the middle of the bazaar. I let the coins in my pocket clink together. Someone called out that the lights were off. The top part of the hall was completely dark. Looking up into the darkness, I felt like I was a fool chasing after something useless, and I felt angry and upset.